and welcome back to the Conspiracy Couple podcast. I'm Marisa.
And I'm Ethan.
And today we have another very interesting topic to dive into with you guys. But before we get started, as always, make sure you're following us on our social medias. If you're not watching on YouTube, then you should go to our YouTube, Conspiracy Couple Podcast, and subscribe. Turn on the post notifications, and like and comment. That sounds like YouTuber wording, right?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. We also have an Instagram. It's Conspiracy Couple. And that's where we post updates on the show about when we drop our episodes, pictures of our wonderful, adorable, incredible conspiracy cats, Domino and Nova, and where you will occasionally see photos of myself and Ethan, but most importantly, you will see pictures of the conspiracy cats. And that's it. That's all our social media.
Yeah.
Yeah. We also wanted to thank all of you who have left us reviews on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate those. So if you send in a review on Apple Podcasts, we will read it on the air.
Potentially.
Potentially.
Unless you don't want us to.
Unless you say, please don't read this, I'm shy. Then we won't read it.
Yeah.
And we also love to highlight comments, and we love it if you guys are on YouTube and you have thoughts about the theories, or if you have an alternate theory or explanation. We love to get you guys' input and share it with everyone else, so that everyone else can kind of hear what you guys are thinking, because you guys are all very intelligent, obviously, because you choose to listen to our podcast. So thank you guys for that. A little update. Nova is just absolutely going ham with Ethan's sweatshirt.
As always.
As always.
This should just be a part of our intro. As soon as we hit record, Nova starts playing around and going crazy. Right now, she is just throwing my sweatshirt around, playing with the strings.
She's like very strong for a very small animal. Like she's like leaping in the air. She's throwing it around. She's doing flips. It's like pretty impressive, honestly.
It is. She's
so cute. Anyways, speaking of cute conspiracy cats, the day after we post this episode will be our big girl, Domino's 15th birthday. So we will have a post on Instagram. I might make a TikTok or a reel. You never know. So wish our good girl a happy birthday. She is an integral part of the Conspiracy Couple family. And she has been with us since the beginning when we were recording on our sofa and she was sitting on our lap.
Yeah.
So yes, Domino.
On our collective lap.
Yeah, she would kind of like spread out until she could get on both of our laps.
Mm-hmm.
Domino's always been a big part of the podcast. Now she just sleeps while we record because she doesn't want to play with Nova.
She slept when we recorded the first time, too. She just slept
on our
next
lap.
to us.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's a big update. Domino's 15th birthday. She's about to go get her learner's permit. We'll see if she passes the test. Another update is, if you didn't notice, we actually took a little bit of an unintentional break for the last month. It was crazy busy finishing up my clinical rotations and Ethan finishing up his work. So we are actually on summer break right now, thank goodness. So we'll have more time. We'll hopefully be doing more episodes more consistently. We're going to try and do them every week.
Yes, that is the hope.
That is the hope, and we might also try and work on some bonus content for all of you guys. So let us know some things that you might find interesting. I know I have things that I think could be fun, both conspiracy related and non-conspiracy related. So if you want to hear some of my ideas, just let me know. Okay, so all of that out of the way, we are going to dive into our topic for this week, and it is a very well-known and tragic historical event, and that is the Salem Witch Trials. So we actually are going to have another two-parter for you.
Get used to that.
Get used to that. So as I started doing the research for this topic, I just kind of felt like there was so much that was important to know and so many different like avenues and aspects I had to go down to really fully cover this topic well. I know every time I would like find something, I'd be like, well, what about like, I need more. And so we will be dropping this episode, and then 1 week from now, we'll be dropping the second part. And as I have more time to do more in-depth research and kind of make sure that I'm getting more information to kind of help you guys form your opinions, you guys might see more two-part episodes.
The hope is to shorten the episodes a little bit, do 2 every week instead of doing one longer one twice a week.
So every other week.
Every week.
2 episodes a week?
2 episodes. Okay, yeah, you're right. 1 episode a week. So 2, but shortening the episodes and splitting them up more.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one conspiracy takes 2 weeks, but we're splitting it up into 2 different.
And giving more information. So, be on the lookout for that. More 2-part episodes, more information. So, as always, Ethan.
So
Do you know anything about the Salem Witch Trials?
they happened.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we learned about them. I don't know what grade we learned about them in, but we learned about them. I know that it surrounded a lot of the fear of witches and like probably. I'm not even gonna guess the year because I don't remember. But basically, a bunch of people were accused of being witches. A bunch of women, I should say, were accused of being witches. And then they had these trials which were designed to tell if they were witches or not. And essentially there were these unsurvivable trials. And the way you proved you weren't a witch was by dying most of the time, to my knowledge. You like got thrown in the river or burned at the stake or something. So it was like, not great. And then there's lots of instances, I think, or belief that people just made up things about somebody for fun or to get back at them or whatever. So it was like a mass hysteria that took place in Salem, Maine? Massachusetts. For the longest time, because I only ever heard of it as the Salem Witch Trials, and because I grew up in the Pacific Northwest.
I thought it was in Oregon.
I thought it was Salem, Oregon for the longest time until we actually learned about it. And I was like, oh, it didn't happen in Oregon. Because Salem, Oregon was the only Salem I knew.
I thought it was in Oregon too.
Yeah.
So you actually covered a lot of great information.
All right, sweet. See you guys next week.
There is one myth that is often thrown in there that a lot of people associate with the Salem Witch Trials, and that is no one was burned at the stake.
I just associate that with witches.
And I think that's because, we'll talk about this more, but there have always been witch trials. That's not like a new thing. And in other instances, in other places in like Europe, that is something that would be done.
Was Joan of Arc, was she tried for being a witch?
She was like...
I know she was burned at the stake.
Centuries before this.
No, I know.
I actually don't know.
You're acting like centuries before this couldn't have had a witch trial.
Probably was. She probably was. I don't know.
I know she was burned at the stake, but I don't remember if it was just because she was a woman or because they thought she was a witch.
I don't know. But yes, so you had a lot of great information. Only thing that was not accurate was a very common misconception about burning at the stake. But great job, Ethan.
I don't think I even got that wrong. I just was using it as an example, and so I think I was right.
Okay. You were right. Anyways, so the Salem Witch Trials began in the spring of 1692 in Salem Village, Massachusetts, but over the next few months, over 150 men, women, and children would be accused of witchcraft, and about 20 were sentenced to death. So...
Oh, men too?
Yes.
I thought it was only women.
No. So we're going to take a look kind of at what life was like leading up to the trials and what it was like living in the village at this time, because that's going to play a huge role in what happened and why it happened. So this was a time where it was a very popularly held and widespread belief that there was a very present and active supernatural world.
So go back real quick on something we said earlier. Joan of Arc was burned at the stake because she was charged of heresy.
Oh, okay.
And she was only 19.
Well, women grew up fast in those days.
I think everybody did.
That's true, but women were already like married and having babies by 15.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Sorry, I was just like, I need to know.
Yeah.
She died. Or not why she died, I guess.
But for the most part, everyone in this area believed that the devil was real and that he would give powers to certain people and that he could manifest himself in physical ways, and that he would give powers to people or witches, and basically they would get powers and then they would have to do his bidding in exchange for loyalty to him. And it was believed that witches were able to change into animal form or into the form of another human, and that they used demons to help them accomplish the devil's bidding, and that they flew through the air at night to go to secret witch meetings and orgies. And this was a belief that had come about in Europe in around the 14th century and had come to the New World with the settlers who left Europe to move to America. And there was a wider spread version of the witch trials that took place all over Europe a few centuries before, from the 13th to the 16th century. And in Europe, it was kind of winding down, the practice was, when it picked up in the colonies. And over the course of these couple centuries, in Europe, tens of thousands of supposed witches were executed. And of course, the majority of those accused and executed were women. And the last known person to be executed for witchcraft in Europe was in Switzerland in 1782. So that's kind of the history of like the witch trials and what people believed about witches and the supernatural. And now we're going to talk about what it was like to live in Salem Village. So living in this area at this time had its own share of difficulties. Obviously, the Revolutionary War hadn't occurred yet, but there were still a lot of skirmishes and battles that affected the colonists. A few years before, in 1689, there was a war between the British and the French that took place in the colonies known as William's War. And the war had devastating effects on the colonies and led to a large influx of refugees fleeing from the northern colonies to live in the Salem area. And as you know, in this time, there were a lot of like battles going on to try and decide who in Europe would get what part of the New World. And there was a lot of trying to get established in certain places and reclaim certain places. And so there were a lot of battles between Spain, France, Britain, and I believe Portugal to kind of get these new places. So we have a lot of refugees coming into the Salem area, and the new flock of people who moved into the area put a strain on the village, including the limited resources in the area, as well as the people living in the village. And so one of the biggest sources of conflict was this division between two main groups who lived in the area. There were those who were more affluent and who were merchants and engaged in business. And then there were poor members of the community who were more into farming and more dependent on agriculture. There had also recently been a smallpox epidemic that had gone through the area. And there was a huge concern for infectious disease in the settlers at that time. As well as a lot of animosity between the settlers and the Native American tribes who lived in the area. So we have disease, division within the town, recent wars, conflict with the Native American tribes, and Salem Village. Okay, so Salem Village is where most of this happens, but there is another place right by Salem Village called Salem Town.
They weren't very good at naming.
So there's two different places. So Salem Village had always had a contentious relationship with Salem Town, and Salem Town was more affluent and wealthy than Salem Village was.
Right, because it's a town, not a village.
Right. What? I said right, and then I was like, wait a minute.
Makes sense.
So Salem Town is what modern-day Salem is. So Salem Town became Salem. And Salem Village is about 10 miles away. And so Salem Village had about 500 residents, and it was more agricultural. There was also a big rivalry, not between the two towns, but also between two families in the area, the Porters and the Putnams. So the Porters were very wealthy and were connected to Salem Town, and the Putnams were from Salem Village. They wanted more autonomy for the village and tended to speak for the poor farming families.
This is giving me Pawnee and Eagleton vibes.
Pawnee and Eagleton.
All right, Parks and Rec fans out there.
At first I was like, I don't know. I was like, Hatfields and McCoys. Those two families were always fighting. Anyways, Pawnee and Eagleton. There was also a lot of controversy and division surrounding a man named Reverend Samuel Parris. And he became the first ordained minister in Salem in 1689. So many people did not like him and didn't want him to be the minister, claiming that he was greedy, he did questionable things with the money, and he was too strict and too rigid in his ways. The Putnams were very influential in securing Samuel Parris as the minister. And eventually the split became so significant that the town was divided into pro and anti-Parris sides. But regardless, Parris and his whole family moved from Boston to Salem and were given the ministry house to live in. So all this to say, there was a lot going on at this time that fueled the townspeople's fear of outsiders and people who were different than them, as well as frustration and conflict with their neighbors. Even within the same town, we have a significant division over who was going to be the minister. And as I talk a little bit more about the Puritan way of life, That's a big deal. And the Puritan villagers also thought that if there was any dissension or conflict between the members of the town, that it was the work of the devil who was responsible for stirring this up. And just as a little bit of background information, I also thought it would be helpful to kind of dive into the Puritan religion, because this story is very heavily influenced by Puritanism, so that we could kind of understand their beliefs and their point of view. So the Puritan movement was an offshoot of the Church of England that began in the late 16th century, and the Church of England the Puritan movement split off from the Church of England when they came to believe that the Church of England was still too similar to the Catholic Church. And they wanted to eliminate practices that they said were not outlined in the Bible. And if you don't know, the Church of England was formed as an offshoot of Catholicism by Henry VIII when he wanted to get a divorce. But the Catholic Church wouldn't let him, so he formed his own church. Henry VIII, the one who had all the wives and never had a son. So the expectations of a Puritan were very strict, and they were expected to follow this very strict set of moral codes and practices. So the term Puritan was actually originally the name that was given to them by their critics as kind of a demeaning term to kind of indicate and call them out for how strict they were and sometimes hypocritical they could be. And one of the sources I used, and will of course be linked, had a quote that really stuck out to me. And it said, "The Puritans lived in a constant state of spiritual anxiety and fear that they were not being good enough." So there was this really heavy, I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this, or else I'm going to be disappointing God, or I'm not going to be living up to the requirements or the expectations of me. And at the time of the witch trials, religion and faith was a huge part of everyone's life. And the Puritan viewed personal spirituality and religion important, but also viewed the spiritual health of the community as being incredibly important. So it wasn't just you have your individual relationship with God and you have your individual interpretation of the Bible. It was our community needs to be held to this high standard. And so a lot of Puritans fled England and settled in the North American colonies in the 1620s and 1630s. So what was interesting about the Puritans is that, in compared to other colonists, they would usually come over as a whole family unit, whereas other colonists who would go to different places would send the men first, and they would get the town set up, and then they would send for their wives and children. But the Puritans had this emphasis on family, and so they would usually have the whole family come together. And it was Puritans who also split off and kind of established Plymouth. So in 1641, kind of a little bit of a lead up, so about 20, 30 years before this happened, the Puritan legal code was enacted. And it listed the expectations of a good Puritan in the hierarchy of crimes. So they listed it in order from most to least severe. So it went idolatry, witchcraft, blasphemy, murder, poisoning, and bestiality. And I don't know why poisoning is not like synonymous with murder.
It's like if you poison somebody but don't kill them.
And they don't die. Okay. So just like based off of that list.
Murder, then attempted murder.
Right. Working with the devil and witchcraft was the worst thing you could do in Puritan society. Because idolatry, of course, is putting anything above God. If they're working with the devil, they're obviously putting the devil above God.
Yeah.
And witchcraft. So that's just kind of a little glimpse into what it was like living in the colonies, what the way of life was for these Puritans. And it extended from childhood to adults. Most of the time was spent in church, studying their Bibles, working around like the village. So there wasn't a lot of like free time. So now we've gotten some background. We kind of know what's going on. Let's get into the timeline of events. So January 1692, two young girls named Elizabeth, or Betty, I'll be calling her Betty, Paris, who was 9, and Abigail Williams, who was 11, began to disappear for short periods of time. And it was later found out that they were participating in fortune telling to hopefully see their future. So they kind of wanted to, they were just kind of messing around with this kind of stuff. They also began to experience some strange and frightening symptoms to their family and to the community. So they described what was happening to them as fits, in which they would experience uncontrollable and violent body spasms and contortions and random bouts of screaming. Betty would hide under the furniture and bark like a dog. Abigail started engaging in this behavior shortly after her cousin. The two of them were cousins.
Huh.
And they also claimed that they were being bitten by something that they couldn't see all over their bodies. So the interesting thing is these girls were the daughter and niece of Samuel Parris.
Of course.
Of course, their parents freak out. They call a village doctor after they tried their own, prayer, home remedies, and nothing worked. So William Griggs was the town physician, and a minister also came to evaluate the girls. The two of them came, and they were diagnosed with something called bewitchment. At the time, there was only one doctor in Salem Village, and apparently he could not write. He could read, but he could not write, so he was partially literate. So bewitchment is the diagnosis, and this was shocking. This was incredibly shocking in the community. After this diagnosis was made, other young girls in the area began experiencing similar symptoms. The other young girls who were affected were named Ann Putnam Jr. Okay, that name sounds familiar, doesn't it? Putnam.
Oh, yeah.
A girl named Mercy Lewis, Elizabeth Hubbard, Mary Walcott, and Mary Warren. And after these girls start experiencing the same symptoms, they are also diagnosed with bewitchment. And so what would happen would be the town members would see the afflicted girls just going into these fits, acting crazy, especially during church. They also spent a lot of time in church, but they would just be sitting in church in the middle of services, and they would start screaming, contorting their bodies, having muscle spasms, and saying that they were being bitten. So the girls make accusations. And they state that the Caribbean slave of the Parris family, a woman named Tituba, along with a homeless woman named Sarah Good, and a poor older woman named Sarah Osborne, had bewitched them. So in February, the three of them were arrested. Sarah Good was the mother of a 4-year-old daughter, and she was also pregnant at the time. And Sarah Osborne had not been a regular attender at church, and was also, at the time, suing the family of one of the accusers. And she had also apparently been kind of an outsider because she had had sex outside of marriage. And it is believed...
Not very pure.
Not very Puritan. She was not very Puritan.
She was not very Puritan.
Puritan. So it's believed that these girls accused these three after a lot of pressure from the local magistrates. Who did this to you? Who did this to you? Who did this to you? And they point the finger. So there was quite the scene in the courtroom when the three women went to trial. So the girls who had accused them were in the courtroom, and they began having the same troubling symptoms that they had had when they were first diagnosed with bewitchment. So they're in the courtroom, the girls start shaking, they start screaming, they start contorting their bodies. And of course, everyone is freaking out because they're doing this trial for these accused witches, and here are the afflicted girls acting the exact same way as they were when they got this diagnosis. So the two Sarahs say that they're innocent, and Tuba initially said she was innocent as well. But after being questioned over and over and over and over and over, Tituba said that she was guilty, that she was a witch, and that there were other witches living among them, secretly doing the devil's work. So, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit more. So basically, Tituba was quoted as saying, quote, this is a quote, "The devil came to me and bid me serve him," and described a tall, dark man who was dressed all in black, and he came to her and wanted her to sign his book, which she did, basically sign the book and pledge herself to him. And she said that in the book, she saw the names of the two Sarahs as well, along with 7 other names that she couldn't read. So Tituba says,
I'm a witch.
I'm a witch.
These people are also witches.
Yes. She says, I am a witch. They are witches. But she initially said she wasn't, and then she was questioned. Okay, fine, I'm a witch. And she also worked with the magistrates and judges to find the other witches in the area, and at one point claimed that she had gone blind for a period of time as a sign that the devil was punishing her for testifying against him and working against him and his followers. So, Tituba says that she is a witch. And I'm sure that you can imagine the frenzy that this statement caused in the village.
Yeah.
So she says, I'm a witch. That's like their biggest fear is witchcraft. And that there are more witches hiding in plain sight. And these people are casting spells on the villagers and are trying to destroy the Puritans. And so this is terrifying to them. So after her testimony, 3 women are put in jail. Sarah Osborne actually died in prison. And Sarah Good's husband actually turned against her in the trial.
Wow.
Yeah. And he said that she was a witch or would be one very quickly. So basically she gets arrested. He says, oh yeah, she's a witch.
She's a witch or she's gonna be one?
Yes. Yes. And what I have a feeling about why he accused her. And I mean, I'm probably right. Because if he would have, and we'll talk about this later, but if he would have stood up for her and said, no, she's not a witch, then they would have looked at him.
He's saving his own skin.
He's saving his own skin.
He's
which
being
is not
a bad husband.
He's being a bad husband. Okay, here's what you're supposed to do as a husband. You're supposed to, like, throw yourself in front of your wife and protect her. He should have thrown himself in front of Sarah and protected her. She was pregnant. Yeah, and he's like, oh, she's a witch. She's definitely a witch. And so basically he just kind of, I don't want anything to do with it. So he just kind of.
What does it mean? She will be soon. Like, what does that mean? How do you say, like, what?
That if the devil hasn't gotten to her now, he's going too soon. Maybe he just is kind of like casting doubt on her character.
I guess.
That she has the potential to be in league with the devil.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. It doesn't,
But anyways, Sarah Good's husband.
Not very good.
Not very good. So Sarah Good's husband turned against her, and they also took Sarah Good's 4-year-old daughter, and they put her in prison, and eventually got her to testify against her mom.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. So they have this little girl. Her name is Dorothy. This little Dorothy's 4 years old. They get her. They have her, like, I mean, of course, she's 4 years old. They're just pressuring her. I don't believe that Sarah Good's husband is the father of Dorothy. But they're pressuring her. This person who is, like, a father figure in her life is now saying her mom is a witch. And so then eventually they have her testify against her mom. So Sarah Good gives birth in prison, but the baby died shortly after. And eventually she ended up being hanged. She was not the first one to be hanged, but she was one of them. So Tituba was held in prison for over a year before being the last of the accused to be released.
She was released.
She was. Yes. And I think
I'm forming a theory already.
I think we talk about this in the next episode. Or no, I'm going to just kind of briefly say it. Basically, the idea was...
She confessed and started giving off other names to try and get out of it, basically.
Yes. So,
a plea deal.
So we're going to talk about this in the next episode, but this is a good kind of refresher into that. Or a good intro into that. Basically, the point of the trials was to weed out the witches. Then the Puritan system valued repentance over criminal justice. So the idea is, if you are a witch and you admit to being a witch and seek forgiveness and repent, then God will deal with you on his own. But if you are accused of being a witch, you are pretty much guilty. And if you do not confess and do not repent, then you will get hanged for that and for lying about it. And so a lot of people, they would say, okay, well, I'm not a witch. I am a witch, and I can tell you this other person, because one, it would give them leniency,
Right.
and it was showing that they were repentant, that they felt guilty, and so they were bringing in other people.
So really,
as well.
the only way to survive is to throw somebody else under the bus.
Exactly. Yes. So you're accused. Basically, what they would say is either confess or die. And so if you did not confess...
Definitely how you get justice.
Yes. So if you confessed and named names, then you would be, like Tituba, released. But if you said, I'm innocent, then you would end up like Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne and be hanged.
Yeah.
And so this is what kind of led to nearly 200 accusations, was people were getting arrested and they were pointing the finger.
Yep.
Okay, well, I'm a witch, but I'll tell you 2 more people I'm working with.
Yep.
And so it led to this kind of moral dilemma of, do I lie and say I did it? And then also, if you...
Well, you're assuming they're not actually witches.
Right. And then if you say that you're a witch, okay, how do you think that you're going to go to church the next Sunday?
Right.
After having admitted to being a witch?
It's...
So you either lose your credibility in the
Yeah.
community...
Or you lose your life.
Or you lose your life.
Yeah.
So it created like this frenzy. So... yeah, as I said, they would interrogate them relentlessly. And in the next episode, we're going to get more into the interrogation practices and what some of the things they did to identify witches were. And the goal of questioning was to get them to confess to being a witch.
Yeah.
It wasn't to get the truth, it was to get them to say, I'm a witch, you're right. So, after this, 3 more people get accused of witchcraft. After the first 3 women go to prison. So... 2 of the 3 were Martha Corey and Rebecca Nurse. And both of these women were considered to be really upstanding members in the community. Another person who gets accused of witchcraft is Dorothy Good, the 4-year-old daughter of Sarah Good.
Oh my gosh, what?
Yes. So, essentially, what a lot of children were also accused of witchcraft, and 2 dogs were executed for witchcraft as well. Yes. So remember the name Martha Corey, because she's going to play a big role in the next episode. So Martha Corey's accusation specifically really shook up the community and led to this huge paranoia. So Martha Corey was, as I said, really involved in the church. She was a really good member of society. She had a great reputation. She was also 80 years old. So she's quite old. She's lived in the society for a long time. And she has a great reputation. And so the people in the society, the idea here is it's not innocent till proven guilty. It's guilty until proven innocent.
It's guilty until you confess.
Exactly.
And then we forgive you.
Exactly. And the whole idea was, if you end up in this court being accused, there's a reason to suspect you. So even if you have an accusation against you, it's probably because you have a reason. And so... they were looking at this like, if someone like her could be a witch, then anyone could be a witch. And there's nobody that's safe, and there's nobody that we can count on to be, this person is good, this person's definitely not involved. And so Martha Corey and Rebecca Nurse really, really shake up things. And so in the next episode, we're going to talk about Martha Corey's husband, Giles. And I want you to compare her husband and Sarah Good's husband, and just kind of see how both of these men kind of play into their wives' stories. So, as I said, Dorothy Good, the 4-year-old daughter of Sarah Good, was questioned. And she was shy and she was timid in answering the questions, of course, because she's literally 4 years old. And so they took her timidity and shyness to be admission of guilt. That she was shy and she was uncomfortable because she was guilty, because she was a witch.
Oh my gosh.
Not because she's 4 years old.
Not because she's a literal child.
A literal child. I don't know if you've interacted with 4-year-olds very much. Specifically, I think 4-year-old girls. But they can be quite shy, especially around adults. And especially adults who are putting them in prison. And I'm assuming their prisons are terrible. And, you know, she's taken away from her home. She sees her mom go to jail. These people now come and take her. And they're asking, are you a witch? Are you a witch? She's 4. She probably doesn't even know what a witch is. So they look at that as she's guilty. So, of course, after this, more people start naming names and accusing others. And they're hoping that when they accuse other people, they're going to get leniency.
Right.
And they're going to be released. And this led to so many supposed witches that the court system they had in place got totally overwhelmed. And it led to people from other areas coming in and being accused of witches as well.
Wow.
So this is kind of where we conclude the first episode, or the first portion. Next week, we're going to talk about the special court that they created to try witches, and some of the ways they would use to test if someone was a witch, as well as some of the theories about what caused this, what is behind this, and the legacy of the trials. So, Ethan, as we conclude this part, any thoughts, any things that you think might...
I think Marissa's a witch. I don't know if somebody out there wants to do something about it, but I think she's a witch.
Thanks, Ethan.
Yeah.
Way to be a Sarah Good's husband.
I'm good.
I'm not a witch. Anyways.
That's exactly what a witch would say.
I do consort with animals a lot, so do you. I think you're a witch.
You know, I am a witch, and I can tell you for a fact that Marissa is also a witch, because we are both witches. So let me off free because I have admitted that and I move on now.
Anyways.
She's a witch.
We'll be back next week with part 2. And part 2 is where, we're going to talk about the theories and what we think.
We already said what we were going to talk about.
I know. But we're going to talk about what we think, and we want to hear what you guys think.
So don't tell us what you think yet. We don't want to know yet.
No, we do. Anyways, we'll be back in 1 week. Make sure to wish Domino a happy birthday. And we will see you later.
Bye.
Bye.